Serious therapists of Reddit. Have you ever hated a client? Why? I've never met a patient whom I've hated. I have, however, met patients where our work together has been highly unpleasant. I hold no ill will toward them, but I do not look forward to seeing them. I work in a behavioral hospital. I have worked a lot with children who were abused by their parents and who otherwise live quite shitty home lives. I can't say I've ever really hated a client, but I have absolutely hated some of my clients' parents. I understood that the kids were acting the way they were because of their upbringing, and while some were directly hostile at me, I've been hit multiple times before. I haven't ever hated the kid for it. Now, have I been frustrated? Duck yeah. Better believe it. But hate? No a-hole here. I worked in a behavioral hospital for about 3 years and the parents were the worst. I hate them. But the kids, even the most annoying and challenging ones, you can't hate. They already have had so much rejection and hatred in their lives you can't do. Did I strongly dislike the girl who pulled out a chunk of my hair? Or the boy who left a bite mark on my shoulder? Yes. But I still showed up and did my one-on-one time with them and helped them through what they needed to do. It's really common for people to worry that their therapist is judging them or dislikes them. However, it's part of our training and our professional code of ethics to practice non-judgmental positive regard. We also get ongoing supervision around challenging feelings that come up. Even private practitioners often maintain a connection to another therapist as a mentor for tough cases. Another thing to remember is that we hear a lot, and that the thing that is shocking or shameful to you is likely pretty common. We are proud that you feel ready to recognize problematic patterns of behavior and maybe even make some change. All that being said, threatening your therapist with physical or sexual violence, or coming to sessions armed, intoxicated, or high can get you fired from therapy. We've all had that happen at least once, and it can be really scary. Remember a therapist telling me a paranoid person pulled a gun on them in therapy. Apparently he survived by saying, "If you shoot me, I'll die and haunt you for the rest of your life," which made her run away. Also he said one tried to stab him through his glasses and almost blinded him. Both got fired and didn't understand why. Kind of. Hate is a strong word. I've had a couple who had narcissistic behaviors and refused to see the way they were hurting everyone around them. Reminded me of my mom, so that made it so much harder to try and work with them. Would not acknowledge their own mental emotional pain, hurt others, and then complained they were lonely. 16,000 plus hours in the field. The absolute worst clients you can have are people that are forced to do it by someone else. It's a very weird dynamic where they will talk about certain things openly and then blatantly lie about things they think I'm going to tell their spouse, partner, parent, ally. As I look into their eyes and ask a question I already know the answer to, and they blatantly lie to me. It's infuriating sometimes. Client with substance use disorder, sitting across from me, obviously high on opiates, and I ask questions regarding triggers or cravings and they just lie that everything is alright and they feel great. I can see the pain in their eyes. I had it once. Also, Jack, you're an entitled ass. Please leave your family alone. Mandated clients are some of the worst. I had one who simply refused to talk to me at all. I had to do telehealth with him due to COVID, and I asked him in our first session to simply tell me about himself. And he responded, "I don't know you, so I don't feel comfortable discussing my life with you. I'd appreciate you minding your own business. Just note that I was here. Tell the nurse to refill my prescription," and hung up. He then texted, "Don't ever contact me again. Ever." He then called the front desk a few days later demanding more medication and blasting me for marking him as non-compliant and thus getting him in trouble with his probation officer. They explained that if he didn't cooperate with counseling, we would discharge him. He conceded and gave me about 10 minutes a week later, once again either refusing to answer questions, giving me one-word answers, or giving me clear lies. After that, he went back to demanding that we give him his drugs and waive the requirement for counseling. So, at that point, I discharged him and let his PO know. She told me that she was about to arrest him for violation of a restraining order anyway, So his drug-seeking behavior and refusal to cooperate with his probation terms was just one more log to stack on that pile. Before he got locked up, he started sending me threats for discharging him and telling me that cutting him off from his drugs was literally a crime against humanity and that he had been nice to me, but that I needed to be careful because he was the most ruthless person we'll ever meet. I just laughed when I saw that. I'm a former correctional officer and I've met hitmen and mass murderers. This small-time thug didn't even crack my top 100. I don't think I've ever hated any of my clients, but I think I definitely disliked working with a few. I've done quite a lot of work with sex offenders, and while I could do good work with many of them, there were some who were completely remorseless and saw themselves as the real victims for getting caught imprisoned. We were still able to make progress together, but it was draining and punishing work. Not really hated. Those with narcissistic personality disorder who think they can manipulate you and are clearly harming others are frustrating to work with. I work with kids now, and I do hate some parents. The ones who reject their LGBTQ kids. The ones who have flat out told their kids they hate them, and they never wanted them. My least favorite are the parents in a custody dispute who think they can feed lines to their kids to repeat in sessions about how awful the other parent is in order to try and obtain the case notes for the custody hearing later on. The community mental health system is under enough strain. We don't need those cases tying up our CASA loads and being used as a tool in family conflict. I still like the kids in those scenarios, but it's sad to see how manipulative the parents are. Don't get me wrong. There are appropriate files where a kid is struggling with the separation. I'm talking about a few I've had where it's clear one parent is feeding a kid lines to say about their other parent, to say in session. It's pretty obvious when you see it and it's frustrating. I hate parents that put their kids in the middle of that. I'm a behavioral health specialist, specifically working in addiction. I will be honest and say that I did have a client that I hated. Consensus in our job was that she didn't even have a problem with alcohol, but she was homeless and pregnant and knew we'd let her in. She was a bully, both towards staff and her peers. She was abusive towards her child in her care. She was rude, disrespectful, and unwilling to accept direction. She had an aggressive past and behaved in a physically aggressive manner, but towed the line just enough that you couldn't prove she was attempting to physically intimidate you. She left me fearful for my safety every time she was in my office. Her problems with me came from race and sexuality. A coworker outed me at work. I didn't share with my clients that I was gay. We couldn't discharge her because 2 of my staff were caught on camera manhandling the child in her care and were promptly fired at those staff. And my director was worried she'd pursue legal action against our company if we discharged her. However, while it is okay and even common to have negative feelings towards some clients, you must do what your professional ethics call of you. So, I continued to keep a straight, professional, and welcoming face with the client. I spoke with my director to talk about my feelings, and she recommended I have no one-on-one interactions with the client, and that I was not involved with her care outside of the groups I performed. And I treated her exactly as I'd treat any other client otherwise. The only real difference ended up being that I'd report her behaviors to another staff to address, instead of addressing them myself. Ultimately, we were able to discharge her when she threatened another staff member with bodily harm, while other staff were there to witness. I hope our paths do not cross again, but if they do, I'll continue to maintain the same level of professionalism. Asked my aunt, who's a licensed sex therapist and did a master's in psychology. I'm paraphrasing. I don't genuinely hate many clients. At worst they annoy me. But when you've been doing this for decades it becomes easier to deal with. One thing that gives me pet peeves is a lot of male clients have misconception and misogynistic view of sex and sex work. The men who buy it are very rarely the stereotypical desperate gross loser who can't get a date. It's usually the men are looking for validation. Lonely because of loss of a wife or partner, or a combination of ego, because it gives them a sense of power, real or imagined. So yeah, that's her only pet peeve. Everything else she's like a Teflon. Seen it all. Psychology student here. Thing is, When a therapist cannot maintain a professional relationship with one of their clients, like hating a client or falling in love, they have the option to end the relationship. Keeping a relationship with a client professional is one of the most important aspects of ethics and psychology, and usually a therapist is forced to end things as soon as things start getting unprofessional. Yes, unfortunately, I worked with several clients with narcissistic personality disorder. They weren't in treatment to better themselves. They were in treatment to find other vulnerable people to prey on. I worked at an outpatient day program. The positive of the situation was that it gave the other clients real experience with setting boundaries and not letting others take advantage of them. I wouldn't say hate, but there are definitely some where you just roll your eyes and sigh. We can give you all the tools to be successful, but it just depends on how you use those tools. Same thing with addiction. We can send you to rehab 100 times. You know everything you need to do. The only way things will change, if you want to change. An analogy I tend to use is like having you fix a door. If you have a sledgehammer, you are going to break the door. If I give you a screwdriver and teach you how to use it, you will fix the door. Honestly, a lot of the routine cases tend to blur together. Of course, there are a handful unique situations and patients that are memorable, but even with difficult cases, the majority is mostly out of sight, out of mind. So no, I don't hate anyone specifically. There is a particularly difficult situation I don't mind sharing though. I've been dealing with it the past year and a half or so. Not the patient themselves. That person is wonderful and a pleasure to work with, but they have someone in their life causing a lot of problems. It started off with that person calling our billing office presenting a financial concern. Nothing out of the ordinary. Happens all the time. But it quickly spiraled out of control with them attempting to get detailed clinical information, which we are extremely protective over for obvious reasons. They started calling in pretending to be the patient, claiming the fake name and credentials. We know our patient. It's obviously not them. This has continued to the point of them calling in multiple times a day, being extremely abusive and threatening, and is still ongoing. We still get phone calls multiple times a week. I've listened to a few of the calls and actually spoken to the caller myself a few times, and even for me that person is difficult. We have had the authorities involved as well as considered ending our relationship with the patient, but since it's not the patient themselves causing the problem, we decided it's unfair to them to end the relationship. We developed special process for them and billing concerns. Although we still get phone calls, we have cut the nonsense and gained a bit of control over the situation. Hate as in I would be happy to hear that she died in a car fire, screaming as her flesh melted. No, but I did have one client that I very strongly disliked. Nobody at the clinic couldn't stand her. She had both borderline and narcissistic personality disorder. She had a terrible temper and just simply treated everybody in her life like absolute shit. She was an enhanced Karen A. I've never met anyone who had such vile, seething hatred for literally everyone she had met. All it took is for a person to displease her once, and she wanted them torn limb from limb and their houses burned with their families inside. She would call me almost every day, even if I wasn't at work, then bomb me with text messages that got progressively angrier and more abusive because I refused to answer my work number for anyone when I wasn't on duty. She would accuse me of neglect and malpractice and would threaten to report me. She of course complained to my supervisor, who, to this day, is one of the best supervisors I've ever had. My supervisor politely and in clinical terms told A that contacting me outside clinical hours was a boundary violation, that she had other options for mental health crisis when her primary clinician was unavailable, of which she had been made clearly aware, and that if she didn't like those options she could go duck herself. I also would demand to change her appointment times every single week, usually only about an hour before they were to begin. If I was unavailable at the new time, she would bomb my phone, and then when I didn't answer, she'd call the front desk and demand that they reschedule whoever I was seeing at the time, that she wanted to switch her appointment to, often threatening to report us for neglect if we refused. She had sought services and dragged her unwilling boyfriend along for couples counseling. Really what she wanted was for me to yell at him and tell him to do everything she demanded of him. Now, he was no saint either. but he was a bit more normal than her, and his anger was mostly directed at A and her equally horrible mother, rather than everybody like A's anger and hatred. They would both just argue and fight the entire time. Neither would compromise on one single thing in their lives. She had wanted completely control of his life, when he woke up, when and what he did around the house, what he did for a job, what he did for fun, and she wanted him to have sex with her on demand. He decided to just not do anything. He would stay up half the night playing video games. He did help out a lot around their house, but he woke up on his own time, did chores on his own time, applied for jobs that he wanted to do, and refused to have sex with her because of how disrespectfully she treated him. His behavior was partially laziness and stubbornness on his part, but a huge part of it was out of spite and just being fed up with her. It was a train wreck, and neither wanted to leave her out of fear of abandonment, and him because he simply didn't give a duck about anything anymore. In our final session, she chewed me out for being ineffective and unqualified, and suggested that our clinic was violating state guidelines by allowing me, an MSW intern, to be their clinician instead of assigning them an LCSW or LPC. I explained that by working directly under an LCSW, we were completely within state and national guidelines. My credentials were made perfectly clear at the beginning of our work together, and they had the option to look elsewhere months ago if they hadn't wanted to work with an intern. All in all, I couldn't give less of a shit that she was dissatisfied with my work. I was just glad to be rid of her. Trigger warning: sexual assault and rape mentioned vaguely. Sab believes sexual assault survivors. It's not hate towards the patient, but their behavior really. It's hard to hate someone when you learn to conceptualize why they do things. One comes to mind. Lots of abuse and rape in her past. Learned to be extremely manipulative and Machiavellian to get her needs met and survive. Would cry wolf with sexual assault to get out of trouble in most situations. It put a lot of the sexual assault charities and women's shelters in really weird positions. She would be caught for possession or prostitution, claim assault or rape, ask for the resources for shelters or NPOs, get them to pick her up and bring her there, eat a meal, then refuse to give them any details or give them details that didn't match, and then call the individual she often reported on who was suspected to be her pimp to pick her up and take her home. She admitted to doing this as a racket in a session, called the social workers idiots. It was difficult to stay unconditional to that behavior. Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing for more videos.